Good morning and welcome to day one of two of Canada's first Economic Recovery Summit. I'm Anita, Huberman, CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. The Surrey Economic Recovery Summit will focus on the strength and innovation within every entrepreneur and workplace to take an idea and use it as the foundation for building a business. I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, please, our sponsors of this event, I'd like to thank them so much for their partnership for this event. Our premier sponsor is the accounting firm of MNP. Our gold sponsor is SFU Surrey Campus and the Beedie School of Business. Our silver sponsors, Kwantlen Polytechnic University and the Port of Vancouver. And our bronze sponsor is the Downtown Surrey Business Improvement Association. Thank you so much for your sponsorship and support of the Surrey Board of Trade. Ladies and gentlemen, the Surrey Board of Trade supports business and attracts business to Surrey. And we are one of 9 organizations as part of the BC Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force, identifying gaps and opportunities during the pandemic. And today, more specifically, as we head out of the pandemic, also identifying opportunities. We know we are very much in the pandemic phase, and we don't know what the second wave of the virus is going to look like and how the pandemic will impact our economy in the future. But what we do know is that we must be proactive to support our businesses. And that's what today and tomorrow is all about, to position and put in assets to ensure that Surrey is ready to become the largest city in British Columbia. We have a unique opportunity to collaborate with leading edge industry leaders today and tomorrow to not only gain insight on current risks and business transformation opportunities, but also how all businesses and not-for-profits can leverage digital technology to innovate and create diverse workplaces to gain a competitive edge. Surrey is the fastest growing city in Canada. And as I mentioned, Surrey is going to be the largest city in British Columbia very soon. Surrey remains and will remain a powerful economic engine. We have the largest industrial land base in the region. Businesses from near and far are looking at Surrey as their choice to do business in. This morning from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. and tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., you will have input into and experience a summit that is the launch of a business continuity platform to support Surrey's diverse industry sectors. It doesn't end with today and tomorrow's event. To tell you more, welcome to the moderator for this morning's Surrey Economic Recovery Summit. He is our partner on this initiative. Please welcome Haroon Rashid, Executive in Residence at the Beedie School of Business, and he's also with MNP. Welcome, Haroon.
Great, Anita. Thank you very much. First of all, welcome everybody, and thank you very much. I think you're going to enjoy the next 2 days. But Anita, I really want to thank you, Heather, and the rest of the Surrey Board of Trade team. You've done an exceptional job of hosting this event, and it's really allowed, myself and MNP and the other collaborators to really focus in on the content that we're here to discuss over the next 2 days. And that's really, I think, the biggest difference about this event. We're going to take a very, very structured approach in the next 2 days. And I'm hopeful that, I'm actually very confident that what it's going to do is going to take us beyond just talking and start to take action through what Paish calls collaborative innovation. And in some ways, it's already working. I mean, if you really think about it, we, started this idea about 3.5 weeks ago. And from that, we've got all these exceptional leaders that have joined this event. And they're really actually here to listen to all the folks that have joined this event. So please go to the breakouts, and they'll work with you to get your input and your ideas in terms of how you think we can move Surrey forward. On tomorrow's session, we're going to have both the Premier and Minister Mangal here, and they'll also be here to listen. And what they'd like to understand from you is, how do you think we should change? What are the future opportunities in Surrey? And as Anita alluded to, this is the start of a process. So as we create that roadmap to that future of Surrey and British Columbia, what are the 3 or 4 initial key steps that we need to be taking, and immediately? And so we'll look forward to your input on the breakout sessions to actually listen and learn from you what you think needs to be done. I think for all of us, the last 2 or 3 months has been, I think you would agree, probably one of the most unique times in history. I mean, COVID has created this immense sort of political, economic, and social turmoil that I think's created sort of an impact on all of our psychics. And I'm sure that all of you have experienced sort of emotional turbulence and thoughts and ideas, and probably felt really overwhelmed. And so I think that's one of the things that sort of gathers us together in times like this. So the reality is this isn't going to go away for a while. And so what are you going to do about it? And what are we collectively going to do about it? And that's really essence of the next 2 days. I know for me, the last couple of months have been a real wake-up call. I watched my 5 kids, who are a beautiful mix of 2 races, go out to march it and to protest of some of the social injustices that currently exist in our society. I was so touched by Dr. Bonnie Henry and her leadership and her empathy to basically make all of us feel good and comfortable and guide us through this crisis the last couple of months. And really, I think that's why you're here. I think you're here, you recognize that all of you have a little of Bonnie Henry in you, and that all of you have something to contribute. And I think we as Canadians and British Columbians really feel proud that we can make things move forward. So all COVID has done really is accelerate us into the future. So we can either be afraid of that future, or we can say, hey, this actually represents a very unique opportunity for us to move things forward. And so on that note, what I'd like to do is actually introduce our keynote speaker. And I just have to say this about her. I've gotten to know her personally in the last couple of weeks, and I find that not only is she an innovator, but she's also a real inspiration in terms of what her ideas in terms of how we need to move things forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sue Paish, CEO of Digital Supercluster. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Haroon. Can you hear me?
I can, very well, thank you. So Sue, I think if you don't mind, I mean, just I think you and I have had some interesting conversations over the last 2 weeks, and I just love your thoughts on why you think we need to change.
Well, that's a big question, and I'm going to give it a fairly short answer because I'm respectful of everyone's time here. I'm going to answer it in the context of digital transformation. So digital transformation was on most organizations' radar list in some context before March 13th. There was lots of talk about digital technology and transformation, but the way we had our economy, many business sectors, and in fact our society structured, was that we had our core businesses, and then over here we had something called innovation or digitization. And it ran parallel to, but we only paid attention to it when we had time or if there was budget. What the last 3 months, actually it's 100 days. 100 days ago, we declared a a state of emergency in this province. In the last 100 days, we've realized that the digital transformation of our industries, our public services, think of health, think of transportation, and indeed our society is no longer an option that hangs outside or bolts onto our regular business. It weaves through every element of our business. So if we want to move from the current state to economic recovery, to economic growth, to prosperity, to global leadership, and I think British Columbia can do all of that, Canada can do all of that, then we have to get serious about the development, the deployment, and the option of technology as a fundamental part of our business. And if there's one thing that we need to do, it's in each of our businesses, think about what digital transformation means. And it's a lot more than making sure we have a common email system or that everybody can work from home. What does it mean to our business? And then how can we accelerate the transformation of our individual companies? Because through that, we will transform the economy and the success of Canada.
Nice. So in the other point I think you brought to my attention, you've thought about that as Canadians, and British Columbians, we need to think bigger, we need to think bolder. And I love the concept you and I talked about the other day about collaborative innovation. So before you go into your presentation, would you sort of maybe articulate that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. The business model that we've had in Canada and has been supported by public policy federally as well as provincially is if we have a good idea in our organization, there are many places we can go to articulate that idea and get support. And I'm talking here mostly public support, public sector support. So we can go through an IRAP program, we can go through a SIF, we can apply for SHRED. And those are all premised on my organization has a good idea and I would like to get support for it. The Supercluster, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment, has taken an entirely different approach to the development of solutions to some of society's and industry's biggest problems. What we've said is, let's identify the problems. Some of them are very obvious, some of them are a little bit less so. And then let's bring organizations around a discussion about how we can solve this problem or how we can address this problem. And let's put people and organizations in a room that might not normally sit together. And that can be uncomfortable. It can be very uncomfortable because our model is, I understand the problem, I have a solution, help me implement my solution. Our approach in the Supercluster has been, let's listen to a number of different perspectives around the problem, and then let's collaboratively work on developing a solution that is better than any single organization could deliver on its own. And this is uncomfortable the first time you do it. It's very uncomfortable, but we have realized over the last 2 years that this is a phenomenally effective way to solve big problems. And I'm just going to give you one little example of a scenario showing that this can be difficult, but it's also successful. Back in September of 2018, when we were just coming out of the gate and we had our first cycle of proposals being developed, I got a telephone call from a CEO in town, very big organization, and he said, Sue, I've heard from my team that's working on this proposal with you guys that they've been invited to some meeting with 18 other organizations and they're only being given 10 minutes on the 2-hour agenda to talk about how we're going to solve this problem. I said, oh, okay. He said, well, what you don't seem to understand is that our organization knows how to solve the problem. And we have a 45-minute presentation. And so can you get in touch with your team and ask them to reorganize the agenda so that my company can present the solution? I said, hey, I got an idea for you. I'll make a deal. You get in touch with your team and ask them to not speak for the first 45 minutes and listen, and then call me back. And if they still need 45 minutes on the next agenda, I'll talk to my team about it. I never heard from him again on that topic. The project was selected, the project has been launched, and the project is a phenomenally successful project for our Supercluster. So at collaborative innovation requires that we think differently and that we think about working with others to solve a common problem. And it works.
Great. Thank you, Sue. I'll let you take over now.
Okay, we're going to just test something here, Haroon, and see if my screen shares. If it doesn't, Jazroop, I'm going to get you to share the screen. I think you've got it. Let's just see. Can you see my screen? Does it come up? No, I can't hear any of you.
I cannot see your screen, Sue.
Okay, let's try one more time.
Yeah, try one more time there. There you go. Something's coming up.
There we go. you see
Yep,
the-
you're good.
All right, just a quick check. Haroon, you can hear me okay? And see this, you can see the slide deck?
I can. Yeah, you're good to go.
Yeah, you're standing in for everybody else. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Surrey Board of Trade Economic Summit. And congratulations to Anita for your vision and your determination in getting this put together. Yes, getting it put together in 2 weeks is unusual, and that's the speed that we have to operate at right now. I'm gonna spend about 20 minutes with you just talking about how do we unlock the power of digital technologies and how do we deploy this concept called collaborative innovation to transform our economy. And I'm going to do that in the context of the digital technology supercluster. Some of you may have heard about the supercluster, but you might not really know who we are, what we've done, and why should you care. So just a little background here in terms of why did we need something like a supercluster to be created by the Government of Canada? You'll see some of the data points here you're familiar with, but Canada's ranking as an innovative economy has been slipping steadily over the last number of years. We are now ranked 12th out of 16 on the global OECD innovation scorecard. Even the most humble person would say 12 out of 16 is not a passing grade, and it's not where we need to be. We also know, and I know Jill Tipping's on this call, and Jill lives in this environment, that 85% of our technology firms in Canada have less than 10 employees, and 50% of those organizations will fail in the first 5 years. They'll either close up or they will disappear because they have been purchased quite often by a foreign jurisdiction. At the same time, we know that more data has been created in the last 2 years than in the previous history of the entire human race, and that's just going to carry forward. We also know that within 5 years, we will have 70 billion smart devices collecting data constantly. So what are we going to do? How are we going to leverage this data? How are we going to make it helpful in the powering and the success of our business? So the superclusters were created by the Government of Canada in 2018, and I'm going to take you on a quick guided tour of who we all are. But I get asked mostly these questions. Who are you? What do you do? And how are you helping Canada? So just quickly, just going to get my screen fixed here. There we go. Just quickly, who are Canada's superclusters? Government of Canada, using some of that data that I just showed on the previous couple of slides, said we have to do something different. We can't just continue with the same approach that we've had to encourage innovation and expect a different result. So the Growth Council, chaired by Dominic Barton, said, here's an idea, the Innovation Supercluster Initiative. It was launched in the end of 2017. And it was a competitive exercise across all of Canada, calling on the private sector to come together and put forward proposals on how a collaboration of private sector organizations could advance Canada's innovation success. And 5 were selected. I've got them on the map here. Even though you'll see that they are conveniently located in every geographic region of Canada, each one of us considers ourselves Canada's supercluster. So while we're located in British Columbia, grounded in British Columbia, we consider that we have a national reach. So why do we exist? I've referenced this already in my conversation with Haroon a moment ago. Our focus is on solving some of the industries and society's biggest problems by the development, deployment, and scaling of digital technologies. A lot of times when people hear, oh, you're a tech organization, they think that we're a sales organization out to sell somebody's cool technology gadget. That's not what we do. We solve big problems. We invest in Canadian companies, and by that, we help these companies to grow. And during COVID, and I'll talk a fair bit about COVID because we pivoted very quickly, what we've been able to do is help Canadian companies keep employees employed, stay active, continue to develop their technologies, and engage positively with customers as customers are themselves now trying to figure out digital transformation. So who are we? We're a member-based organization. We now have over 600 Canadian organizations involved with the Supercluster. You can see just a small sampling of the logos of organizations, everything from Simon Fraser University, obviously one of the more innovative academic institutions, and I know a sponsor of this event today, Province of British Columbia, big organizations like Canfor and Deloitte and Tech, and small startup organizations like Care Team, like Thrive Health, like Terramera, and academic and research institutes from across the country as well. You'll see in the map on the left-hand side, the distribution of our members. The darker color to the lighter color represents the depth and the breadth of the engagement. So 80% of our members are from British Columbia, but we have 20% of our members that are from other jurisdictions across the country. So we really do have national reach. So what do we do in solving these big problems? First of all, if you say you're an organization that's focused on digital technologies, that's what I say is bigger than a bread box, and focus is important. So very early on in the development of this proposal, very much led by Bill Tam, who many of you know, along with Sean Gervais and Greg Cause. We all said, a lot of industries were involved in the development of the proposal. We said, let's focus on 3 sectors of the economy. Let's not try and take on the whole economy. So we focus on health, natural resources, and what we call industrial applications, which is mostly transportation and infrastructure. So those are the primary areas that we focus on from an industry perspective or an economic sector perspective, and they might evolve over time. We cross that with areas of technology. So when we look at data and the use of digital technologies in the effective leveraging of data, we look at 3 elements, and I'm going to start at the bottom on the right-hand side of this slide. First of all, we look at data collection. If you're not collecting your data, then you can't do anything with it. And we've got massive parts of our economy that really don't collect or aggregate their data. So we have a focus on what we call a focus on platforms, development of platforms. We call them data commons that make sure that we leverage things like blockchain and IoT, as well as making sure that we protect privacy and security as organizations learn how to collect the data. Once you've collected the data, you've got to be able to analyze it. So here we deploy some of BC's real strengths in supercomputing, quantum computing to help organizations or industry sectors leverage complex amounts of massive data. Once you're able to analyze, then visualization. So the use of augmented reality, virtual reality to deploy the data in a useful way. So these 2 combine to what's a little bit of a complicated slide, but on the left-hand side, you'll see we have the industry sectors in the black boxes or black circles. We have the orange bars, those are the technology sectors that we focus on. And over on the right-hand side, that's turned into programs. So the Supercluster is not what I call a project approval machine. We just don't take a whole lot of proposals and assess each one of them individually. We assess them in the context of how can this project or this proposal work with other proposals to really transform a sector of the economy. And so we've got 3 programs that we look at: precision health, I'll come back to in a minute, digital twins, and data commons. And then the orange bar on top is capacity building, which is all about talent development. So that's how we operate. So what have we done to date? We have incredibly strong progress. It's really phenomenal and much faster and more significant than I think any of us anticipated. As of earlier this week, we have invested $90 million or committed $90 million over 63 projects. And we are not a funding entity. We co-invest. We co-invest with the private sector. So that 90 million that we have committed in co-investment has been leveraged into $194 million of project value. So we've been able to bring the private sector together to really boost up the value of the projects. We also very quickly pivoted in March to create a COVID-19 program. And that COVID-19 program I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But basically over the last 3 months, we've deployed nearly $60 million in an immediate response to protecting the health and safety of Canadians as a result of COVID impacts, and to help continue to preserve the economy and move into economic recovery, hopefully. So who's doing all this investment from the private sector and public sector? Just a quick chart here that will show you that about half of our private sector investment comes from large companies, but half comes from small companies. So the SMEs across British Columbia and Canada believe in this approach, believe in the power of collaborative innovation, and believe in it so much that they're prepared to put their very precious financial resources on the line in these projects. And then our academic institutions and research and post-secondary institutions also see the benefit of the Supercluster in bridging research and industry applications, a gap that we've had for a long time. So I'm going to turn quickly and give you some examples. So that's all the blah, blah, blah. That's what we do in the Supercluster. What does it really look like? What are some of these 90 projects? I've got 4 or 5 to just give you a quick idea. Earth Data Store. Earth Data Store, you can see at the bottom the companies that are involved in this. And by the way, every one of our proposals has to have at least 3 organizations, one of which must be a small medium enterprise, and one of which must be an academic institution. So Earth Data Store. Earth Data Store is creating a platform to collect and analyze data relative to extreme weather events. So what does this mean? In my language, what if we didn't have to have another Fort McMurray? What if we knew before the forest fire hit Fort McMurray that because of the composition of the forest floor, because of the winds, because of the temperature, because of the lack of moisture in the forest surrounding the city, that if a forest fire hit there, it would spread very rapidly with devastating effects? That's the kind of thing that Earth Data Store is building. It's incredibly exciting. Second example from our precision health program is dermatology point of care. Here's a story on this. 1 in 6 Canadians will get malignant melanoma in their lifetime. Think about that. Right now in Canada, it takes you approximately 6 months to get an appointment with a dermatologist. In that period of time, your survival rate will go from 85% down to 15%. That's devastating if you're a patient or a family member, and it's extremely expensive for the health system. What if you could take technology developed by a little Vancouver-based SME, Meta Optima, whose logo's at the bottom, that allows anyone in Canada to take a photograph of the mole or the lesion on their body, transmit that photograph or that image to their physician, and using the technology that will be embedded in the physician's EMRs, by the time that image gets transmitted to a dermatologist, it has been stratified using AI to say that it is 95% malignant melanoma or 95% it's a freckle, thus reducing diagnosis time from 6 months to a matter of days. Last one I'm going to give an example on is from our Digital Twins project. You can see the companies at the bottom there. Finger Food, of course, is now Unity. What if we could use augmented reality and HoloLens to improve the safety, speed, and cost effectiveness of safety inspections of large vessels? Think of airplanes or ships. What if we could load a digital twin of an airplane into a HoloLens, so that when the inspector goes out to inspect that plane on the tarmac or in the hangar, they're not using a clipboard in effect and a checklist, but rather that digital twin is immediately showing any deficiencies between the perfect plane and the plane that you're seeing in the hangar. that has obvious positive impacts for the safety, the costs, and the effectiveness of transportation systems. So turning now quickly to COVID, mid-March, we were asked by Ottawa to see if we could help with COVID-19. Of course, we said yes. We developed a program with the areas of focus showing on the slide here, mostly on health systems, community health, diagnostics, keeping people safe, and emergency responses. The response, I would say, has been beyond our wildest imagination. I'm just going to go quickly here. Since mid-March, so we actually, early April, we actually launched officially at the end of March. We've had over 550 submissions with total project value of $1.34 billion. We've had 60 million to deploy. And as of earlier this week, we've approved 30 projects with a total budget of 79 million, representing, some of that representing Supercluster investment. So just a couple of quick examples. What kinds of projects are we doing in our COVID program? Rapid repurposing of drugs. What if we looked at the hundreds, maybe thousands of drugs that have been approved by medical systems across the country, and using quantum computing and supercomputing power, evaluated the makeup of those drugs and potential recombinations of those drugs to create therapies to treat COVID conditions, and do that much faster than creating a brand new therapy. Another one is Lifesaver. What if we use data that we've got now from COVID to create predictive platforms so that we can, in future pandemics or in other emergencies, say this is where you're going to need resources. You are going to need resources in long-term care facilities. You are going to need resources in northern communities or in Indigenous populations, and thereby more effectively deploy the resources we've had. So what are we doing in terms of making a difference in Canada? Digital transformation is more important than ever before. I started this by saying you probably all had technology or innovation hanging outside your full business plan. It now has to be embedded as a priority in your business plan. Satya Nadella of Microsoft said we've done more digital transformation in the last 2 weeks than we've done in the last 2 years, and that's going to continue. Canada can be a global leader in the development, deployment, and scaling of digital technologies internationally. Why? Because we're a trusted jurisdiction. We understand business ethics, we have strong human rights, and we know how to do things properly and effectively. SMEs have been hit hard by COVID-19. I think Jill will probably talk about that. And SMEs are going to be the engine of our economic recovery and return to prosperity. You've seen on my previous slides, we work with SMEs, we help them succeed. We focus on solving problems. We deliver solutions to some of the biggest problems in society while supporting small and big organizations working together. And I'll just close by saying we don't just do what I've talked about today. We have already 6 months ago, been looking at big items on the agenda, in particular, clean energy. How can Canada lead in a clean energy solution? The rapid reskilling of talent and ubiquitous broadband connectivity. We were working on these 6 months ago, and you can imagine how important they are now to our economic recovery and economic growth. So we're very proud of what we're doing for Canada. We're exceptionally grateful to our members, many of whom are on this call. And I'll turn it back to you, Haroon. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So I want to thank you. I think even on weekends we've been exchanging emails at midnight and stuff. So I know the hours you keep and the dedication and commitment you have, and really appreciate you taking the time. Just watching the number of folks asking questions on chat. I think we've done, the whole purpose of this was you asked us to start thinking differently and acting differently. And I think you've really sort of stimulated thought in terms of how we can start to do that, and the role that digital supercluster plays in that. So I expect as we move forward, we'll probably have you back at a later event and give you an opportunity to probably expand a little bit more on some of the concepts you introduced. So thank you very much, Sue.
Thank you.
Right. So what I'd like to do now, I think one of the key themes that Sue brought up was the whole idea of taking a data-driven approach. And with that, that's what this whole event is built around. And I'd like to introduce Susan Mowbray, who's the senior economist and research lead at MNP, and James Richardson, who's an MNP partner. So if you guys could turn on your video, and they're actually going to take us, hello James, hello Susan. They're going to take us now through a very structured approach, which they've created to actually start gathering data from you in the breakout sessions. And one thing I will say, don't hold it against Susan just because she's an economist. She's one of the most creative people I've met. So, and I think James can attest to that as well. So James and Susan, please take us forward.
Thank you, Haroon. It's a pleasure to be here today working with the Surrey Board of Trade on this initiative. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Okay.
I can see it.
Great. So the first thing we want to talk about is a little bit of data. And I'm going to share some numbers that many of you are going to be familiar with. The first set is 353,000. That's the number of jobs that were lost in BC between February 2020 and May 2020. And it resulted in an unemployment rate of 13.4% across the province. Job losses and an unemployment rate of this magnitude are not something we've ever seen before, and it can be rather unsettling. But when you look at which industries are affected, the picture looks very different. 255,000 of those job losses were in the retail, food services, accommodation, and others personal services sectors. Whereas if you look at what's happened in the across the rest of the economy, we've lost 98,000 jobs. In those service sectors with those large job losses, the unemployment rate is over 22%. In the other sectors, we're looking at unemployment rates of between 5% and 11%. And this is a very different situation than what we've seen in past crises. And a lot of that is because of what created this situation, and that was the restrictions on movement and border closures as a result of COVID-19. And while some of those restrictions have been eased, and we're about to start moving into phase 3 of our restart program, the border remains closed and we still have significant restrictions on large gatherings. So this is not a temporary situation. It's going to rectify itself anytime soon. Physical distancing is here to stay. And so it's important to recognize that COVID and our response to COVID is going to be a catalyst for change, and that the foundations of many business models are changing. So to understand what that means for Surrey, we need to understand the structure of Surrey's economy and Surrey's economic vision. So I'll start by talking a little bit about Surrey's economic base. These are those industries that bring dollars into the region and attract people to the community. So Surrey's economic base is very similar to that of the larger Metro Vancouver region. It's focused on manufacturing, creative arts, construction, and other technologies. But a big part of supporting those industries is what we call our local supporting industries. And that's where you find retail, government, management companies, real estate, food services, etc. So by working together, that comprises the economy of Surrey. And the vision for Surrey, in terms of Surrey's economic vision from 2017 to 2027, was to advance digital transformation of the base by developing in a few specific areas. And that was advanced manufacturing, clean technology, creative arts, food processing and innovation in the agri-tech sector, and health technology. And what Surrey's planned to do was to focus on investment attraction, building research capacity and encouraging entrepreneurship, building innovation boulevard, workforce development, and providing support for local businesses to grow. So the question is, now with the situation with COVID-19, what has changed? As I said, there's been a lot of disruption to the foundation of many business models. Social distancing means most businesses are having to change how they operate. And for some, those restrictions on gatherings means their entire business model and market have changed. Those costs associated with adapting to that are probably going to lead to the adoption of more technology. We're going to see the introduction of more robots is what the expectation is. So many of those job losses I was talking about in the service sector, they may not be coming back. In terms of how people engage, we're all using electronic platforms, and we've been forced to move from meeting in person to meeting in a virtual world, just like we're meeting today. And we're also starting to question some of our reliance on global supply chains for specific goods. So with all that happening, this kind of disruption is creating a lot of issues. But when you have this kind of disruption, it also creates opportunities. And in the case of Surrey, this disruption is an opportunity to accelerate Surrey's digital transformation and develop those target industries going forward. So what does this actually mean in terms of those 5 strategies that Surrey had initially? Well, investment attraction is still relevant. Building innovation still boulevard, that is still relevant. Continuing to build that research capacity, encouraging entrepreneurship. None of that has really been affected by what we're talking about. Where we're going to see things change is in terms of workforce development and providing support for local businesses to grow. So I just want to illustrate what's happening with that. So if we talk about workforce development, prior to COVID, BC's economy had a very tight labor market. There was a number of skills gaps, and businesses were facing significant labor shortages, which meant it was very difficult for them to expand. The strategy to address those was talent attraction. Well, post-COVID, the skills gaps remain. That hasn't changed. But all those job losses have created a labor pool, and that labor pool is relatively young. Okay? So instead of focusing on talent attraction, the strategy moves to talent development, reskilling and upskilling of all those people who've lost their jobs, or giving them opportunities to do that. And that will help to address some of the labor shortages. In terms of supporting businesses in growing, what we saw pre-COVID was there was a real lack of investment, and this was having negative effects on Canada's productivity. So it wasn't just in BC, it was Canada-wide. And part of that was because we had strong economic conditions, so it reduces the incentives to innovate. Post-COVID, we've had significant changes in the operating environment, which means that survival requires innovation. And so the strategy pre-COVID was to focus on the development of industry clusters and partnerships, and that post-COVID would still be the long-term consideration. But in the short term, businesses to survive need to look at some sort of adaptation. So with that in mind, and we put all this together, the framework for economic recovery looks something like this. In the initial phase, the focus is really just on survival and figuring out what is needed to adapt. Okay? As the economy starts to reopen in phases 2 and 3 of BC's restart plan, the focus turns to the immediate considerations about such as how to comply with physical distancing requirements, but also to start thinking about what has changed about my market demand, and what does this mean about the longer term opportunities that I'm going to have so that I can get to that desired future state. And so at the same time, because we still have COVID, we have to remember that to be successful, we have to be adaptable. And that's because timelines are shifting and the operating environment is evolving as new information becomes available. And so any strategy that we develop has to evolve with those changes. It cannot be static and would ideally involve what Sue was just talking about, that collaborative innovation where there's continued engagement with stakeholders to understand sort of what's going on and figure out how to adapt tactics as we move through this restart plan and the economy begins to reopen. So it's really a journey, is how we like to think of it. And over the past 3 weeks, we've worked with the Surrey Board of Trade to define what that journey would look like for Surrey. And so it started with a survey of businesses, and many of you may have completed that survey. And the purpose of that survey was to take a quick temperature check on what is happening on the ground on a sector basis to give us an initial understanding of what's happening in terms of workforce, finance, and supply chain for these businesses. So today we're here to review what we heard from the survey, gather some input from you on sort of what you think of the survey results and whether they reflect your reality, so that we can understand what it needs for each sector. And from that, tomorrow we'll be sharing with you the what we've identified as the high-level focus areas that need to be the focus in the coming months. So continuing on that journey would involve taking what is learned here and developing an action plan to move forward, and then having those periodic check-ins with stakeholders to make sure that it's working and identifying how it needs to be adapted as things open up and as we move forward. So I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague James to take us through what we heard from the survey before we move on to the breakout sessions and gather input from you. James?
Thanks, Susan. And as all of you will notice, I am the odd man out without the great background. I made the decision after fighting hard with my computer, short of taking a hammer to it, that it was better to be able to see me with no background or have a background and a really creepy version of my face disappearing and reappearing. So bear with me. It is official. I'm not bombing this one. It's coming in and coming to present the survey results. So like Susan said, the survey was that first run at let's get a sense of what's happening out there. Now, it's really important to note, and I want to make sure that Susan's comfortable with the audience understanding, we had 120 responses. That's good. It's not statistically reliable, which is fine. This is just an initial temperature check, but that's really important to take into account as we start to look at what have we heard so far, because that was step one. Step two, both today getting an understanding of what the global results look like across the board, and then in your individual breakout sessions, what does it mean? And that's the chance to come into it again. And doesn't mean that the survey is the God's honest truth. It is the first indication, and we'll take it from there to turn it into what it means. Some of you in this session would have been some of those respondents, and some of you may not have had a chance to either see the survey or respond to it. But the way it was structured and the way that we've structured it going forward is looking into three key areas. So workforce, and that's looking at what happened to your workforce, what are you projecting going forward, financial implications and any issues that are going through, and then more the operations or supply chain perspective. So there's groups of questions in each, and then we'll walk through some of the results of what we saw on a massive scale here, or on the total scale. In your individual breakouts, it'll be focused on your individual sectors and what those sector responses were. So first, let's look at what was the response by subsector. So overwhelmingly, a large number of responses from the services, both in general services, which include professional services, and the tourism related. And then you can see how it get representation from the other sectors there as well. Again, not so much that we have to worry about do we get a perfect sample size from every group, but we did get some responses from all of those key sectors, and it helps us to start the conversation. With regard to business size, the majority of respondents are between 1 and 99, so SMEs. When Paish was talking about those kind of two areas, the big business and smaller enterprises, that's the high representation here, with some representation from larger organizations and some sole proprietors. So a good cross-section of thoughts. Next slide, please, thanks. So one of the key questions that we asked is, and it's been referenced at the top by Anita, the Surrey's economic vision and the 2017 through 2027 plan. And so we asked, does it still remain relevant? Is the relevance still there for Surrey's economic vision? And there's a large proportion that agreed or strongly agreed, but not without those who disagreed. So that'll be interesting to have a look at as we go into on a bi-sector basis. And spoiler alert, we've seen the subsector results, so we have a good sense of what that is. It is concentrated more on the disagreement in certain sectors and concentrated agreement in other sectors, some of which may not come as a big surprise to you. The next slide, please. So the measures taken, when we asked what measures have you taken due to COVID-19, we asked about keeping businesses open. Were you shifting to working remotely? Did you have to change your operations or pivot to different strategies? Or even going into reducing hours of operation to closing your business temporarily or other. So you can see what that stratification of those results look like. For the most part, most responses out of the 120 were saying, no, we kept it open or we're able to work remotely. As you can guess, probably not in all sectors, and that would be, you flip those results on their head. But what's interesting is looking at that other. Thanks. So in the other, when we had to close temporarily, which sectors were those? So mostly in health and the services, also creative arts and culture, a little bit in the education and that services again. So high representation where the closing business temporarily happened in those sectors. And then less so the case with technology, infrastructure, transportation, and manufacturing. I can just get the next slide, please. We also asked about what is your confidence about future sales and business operations. So I think this is when it starts to jump out, and if you sit back and reflect, you go, yeah, this doesn't really surprise me. A much lower confidence level in the creative arts and culture sector or the services and tourism related, hardest impacted. We saw just now that that's the ones that are the most likely to have to suspended operations or closed temporarily. And then on the high confidence level, we see infrastructure, transportation, technology, and then more that services general, which is more heavily weighted towards professional services. So in the middle is, somewhere in between what we have health, education, manufacturing. We unpack that a little bit with a few more questions just to get a better understanding of why do we have these confidence levels being expressed. So from a workforce perspective, and what you see on the left-hand side is what are the key issues that we asked about. And then the other columns afterwards where you have some of the different colors in the X's are those different sectors. So white indicating that it was not a significant issue, so kind of a non-issue for them. And then when you get into the blue, it's a moderate issue, and then the red and the red X there indicating a significant issue. So even to just look at, what does this heat map show us if we just step back and look at it? Creative arts and culture hit really hard. So it had to lay off staff. It cannot work remotely. Kind of hard to do tourism remotely if nobody was allowed to come. Some issues with absenteeism, and then challenges in attracting employees back to work. Starting to see it in a lot of different places where a great intention and good policy around CERB and some of the other wage subsidies that were put out there. But on an individual basis, it starts to create disincentives to returning to work if that income stream changes. So certainly saw it highlighted in the creative arts and culture sector, as well as the tourism related area, and then sporadically elsewhere. If we look at it on the next slide here from a finance perspective, across the board, no one said that they're immune to decreases in revenue. That was felt by all, and it's significant. It's not immaterial. In a few cases, saw some increases in revenue. So that's probably just a timing point. You had a decrease, and then you had some increases. Not surprisingly, technology. Boy, was there a lot of us that had to use technology to work remotely, interact remotely. Manufacturing, when there's kicking up on the creation of sanitizer or PPE and all those other different things. And then infrastructure and transportation as we're trying to look for some of that stimulus spending. The increase in operating costs that showed up in a lot of the different sectors, when we unpacked that, we saw is heavily related to compliance with the regulations. The regulations coming out, whether it's physical distancing in manufacturing or some of the requirements around the additional regulatory reporting or components there. Some were able to adjust their pricing strategy to pass that on. Others were not, or while they saw the increase in the operating cost, they didn't consider it material enough to have to work with that. Again, very segmented and different on a per sector basis, but this gives you kind of that aggregate picture overall. Dealing with a decrease in revenue and then different effects in different sectors on a finance perspective. Lastly, when we look at that third lens on the supply chain and operations, Here are some of the key issues around changing the cost of compliance that I just spoke about, difficulties in making the physical space adaptations, regulations costly to implement. So all of these things are very COVID related, of having to do and work through that response, whether you could adapt and continue operations some way, or you just could not continue operations and meet those requirements. But then also, even if you are continuing, slowing down that business process due to physical space limitations showing up in manufacturing, infrastructure, health, and services. So it's not a universal experience across all sectors. When we can draw a circle around Surrey, the city of Surrey, and say, okay, here's what the Surrey experience is. But when you start to break it down into individual sectors, you're seeing, differentiation in what that experience looks like. And really, that's the purpose of why we designed and worked with Surrey Board of Trade to go into the breakout sessions, because the richness in the dialogue and the key problem identification is going to come in those breakout sessions that are happening later today. When Susan put up that slide there around what does the journey look like, step one is we put out the survey just to get that first temperature check. This next step two, and going into those breakout sessions and saying on a per sector basis, what does this mean? What does this mean for what the problems and the issues are? We're in the stage right now where it's issue and problem identification. We're not into solutioning yet. It's hard to solve a problem if you haven't defined it. So let's work on actually more fully defining the problem and then running forward with that afterwards. Then that going forward will be the development of action plans, and then checking in, making sure it's working, and then checking in to make sure that it's achieving the results that are set out to be achieved, which is the return to economic activity, economic growth, and that development, and moving towards the future that's been described, prescribed, and envisioned. When you go to the breakout sessions, just before I pass it back to Haroon, I'll just ask, it's going to be really helpful and more fun for you if you can keep your phone or a tablet handy, because there's going to be some interactivity in those breakout sessions to engage the broader audience while we also share information and compare notes. So if you don't have it handy, get it handy in time before you log out of this one and into the next one. So with that, thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Haroon.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan and James. You've really come up with a very creative framework. And I think in the interactive sessions, breakout sessions, look forward to the findings that you'll present tomorrow. And so what I'd like to do right now is, when you go to your breakout sessions, we've got some incredible industry leaders and innovators that will lead those sessions, supported by an MNP partner. And what I'd like to do right now is take a couple of minutes and get those industry leaders introduced. And each one of these leaders, as a matter of fact, could probably do a whole a session by themselves, and probably in the future will. Prem Gill will be in the breakout session she is the CEO of Creative BC. And as Susan and James indicated, that's one of the industries that's been severely impacted due to COVID-19. I wouldn't do it justice, so I will leave it to her and her session to maybe expand on that. But what an individual I would like to introduce is Tracy Arnish. She's the Chief Member Experience Officer of Coast Capital. And Tracy, I know that not only do you have a global and national perspective, but given your role at Coast Capital, you also have a very unique perspective on Surrey. So maybe you could sort of take us through a conversation on that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Haroon, can I confirm you can hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Super, thanks very much. Well, good morning, and just a sincere thank you for having me here today. At Coast Capital Savings, we are very, very proud to be headquartered in the city of Surrey. And as an organization that is very focused on putting the well-being of our members and our communities at the center of our purpose, we've never faced, in our opinion, a more important time to come together with you all on this path to recovery. So today's conversations and tomorrow are extremely important. Now, Haroon, over the past several months, we've been working closely with our over 500,000 members, many of whom live, work, and own businesses in Surrey. And we've certainly seen firsthand the impacts that COVID-19 has had, whether it's been lost income, significant rapid changes to business operations, the layoff of employees, the complexity of managing through the government support programs. Many of our members are struggling. In our own business, we've had significant changes in the way that we deliver our business operations day to day. We actually transitioned over 1,200 of our employees to a work from home setup in just over 4 days. As we've heard from Sue, we had a significant acceleration in our move to digital, which has been ongoing for us over the past couple of years. And we've also importantly seen an increased focus on employee well-being and making sure that the mental well-being of our staff is being put at the forefront. But as we look ahead through these challenges, we absolutely see opportunity. Now, how quickly that opportunity can be realized, it really depends on both the economists that you're speaking to on any given day and how organizations begin to future-proof our economy today. And again, that's why sessions like this are so important. So as we look ahead, we need to continue to support, as Sue has said, the acceleration of technology and to secure the value-added utilization of data. We have to adapt business models, building agility into how we work and how we deliver, with the flexibility to scale up and scale down in real time as we work towards a vaccine and beyond. You'll hear shortly more on the importance that our education sector will play in our recovery, with the reskilling of talent, in my opinion, needing to be our #1 priority, something we've been talking about for years but have not made a move towards. And it's really time to evaluate and look at how we de-risk the value chain against future similar events. And finally, we absolutely have to support our retailers and our restaurants. We need to spend time understanding the new consumer and how they are going to engage with business moving forward. We know that trust in who you do business with and a personalized experience is going to be the critical differentiator to determine who's going to come out on top. And I would just conclude, Haroon, by saying, most importantly, we must create shared value for our community. Shared value for me can occur when we come together with our community, our not-for-profit partners, our corporate and our business partners, and of course, government. And under this model, I'm really confident that we'll have realized opportunity out of this crisis that we're facing, and we will absolutely position Surrey for a strong economic future. So I really look forward to speaking with some of you further today on some of these topics. Thanks, Haroon.
Great, Tracy, and thank you. And I know that if we had some more time, I'd talk to you about your thoughts around the muted economy and the impact on the various industries in Surrey and how they'll need to innovate to overcome that muted economy. But so look forward in a future time of following up with you on that. So thank you very much, Tracy, for taking the time. And so what I'd like to do now is I've had the good fortune of sitting on the Beedie School of Business Advisory Board and being part of driving their innovation agenda. And so I'd like to introduce Kirk Hill. He's the Dean of External Relations at the Beedie School of Business. And he's actually, when I joined the school 8 or 9 years ago on the board, I was very shy. And so Kirk's been very instrumental in helping me come out of my shell. So Kirk, welcome.
Thank you, Haroon. And that's a long story I don't think I'll go into right now. But I want to first thank Haroon and Anita and the Surrey Board of Trade and MNP for not only putting together this dialogue, but a plan to create actions out of that. And that to me is important, that it's just not about dialogue, but we have a path forward together. SFU Beedie and SFU Surrey have been partners on numerous events and opportunities, and we are so pleased to be a part of this today, and me personally as well. For the education sector, in our group, we'll be looking at the impact and future of advanced or post-secondary education sector in our working group. However, we know that and appreciate that much of what we'll discuss today will impact the K-12 sector as well. Like everyone else, the education world changed literally overnight as we went from in-person classes to online or virtual education in a few days. But with the experience and the outcomes may have not been optimal. So going forward, how do we provide effective trades, medical, and other educational programs that require students to work with their hands? And as they say, never waste a good crisis. This time gives us an opportunity to really rethink about education of the future or for the future. In terms of the opportunities, I'd like to paraphrase SFU's president, Andrew Petter. We have an unprecedented unemployment in many industries unlikely to fully recover. We can, as we've talked today, reskill and educate a disrupted and displaced workplace to meet the needs of a greener and more dynamic, and as Sue said, more digital economy. The post-war expansion of universities and colleges in this country helped create the middle class. With the economic fallout of COVID-19 hitting women and vulnerable communities particularly hard, both K through 12 and advanced education can help to level the distribution of knowledge and opportunity, a necessary condition for a broad-based recovery that prevents entrenched inequality from becoming the pandemic's destructive legacy. A third key opportunity is for our institutions, as mentioned, to generate research and promote innovation that can drive the transition to a low carbon, more dynamic and inclusive economy. But how do we adapt, and what support do we need? By becoming exceptional in online and blended education, it means we can serve communities that historically have not had access to advanced education throughout BC and the country. However, with online education, there are socioeconomic challenges that influence access to technology and support for successful learning. Like you, how do we return to campus and what is the long-term impact on how we deliver education? Just to give you a sense of the scope, SFU has over 5 million square feet of campus on in Surrey, Vancouver, and Burnaby. For all students, young or more mature, we need to help them build resilience, adaptability, and a new mindset to work in a world that's constantly changing and requires constant innovation. And finally, to everyone today, we need you, our community, and our industry partners to work with us, the education sector, to identify gaps and future trends so we can work in partnership to develop innovative programs and approaches to address these gaps and future trends. So please join me and Elizabeth Vannon, partner for MMP, who has a deep experience with post-secondary sector, to explore how we can move forward. Thank you, Haroon.
Great. Thank you very much, Kirk. And I'd also like to introduce Ian Tostenson, who is the president and CEO of the BC Restaurant and Food Association that's obviously been very severely impacted. Ian, would you like to turn on your video and your,
there we go.
Welcome, Ian.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a real honor to be able to be part of this. Thank you to the Board of Trade and MMP and the rest of the sponsors. So very briefly, we were the canary in the coal mine, where we literally shut down a $15 billion or $14 billion industry and 15,000 restaurants and 190,000 employees virtually overnight. So the business model, and it was interesting because I think the research reflected this all throughout, went into a very minimalistic delivery and pickup. That was it. It was overnight, and it was obviously devastating for that number of people. We estimate today that as restaurants come back on stream, there's still about 100,000 people unemployed. So the economic analysis we saw at the beginning was very ring true, and hospitality is carrying a large burden of those jobs that are still unemployed. So we wrote the opening plan. I think we were the first sector that did that. We were acknowledged by both the Premier and the Lieutenant Governor in the work that we did, because we wanted to create that pathway, but really recognize a high standard of public safety. So we talked about a second wave, perhaps. I was talking to Dr. Stanwyck in Victoria yesterday, who heads up, he's the CEO of health in Greater Victoria. And his view is that if we stay diligent doing the things we will, we're not going to see restaurants closing, because now restaurants have plexiglass and they have all the protocols in place. But again, the research is right on. It was a very expensive restart for restaurants who virtually have no money to begin with, and they were unprepared. So we've got I think in Surrey, possibly 3,000 to 4,000 restaurants. We estimate that right now we're going to lose 23% of the industry because for various reasons. It's really tragic. That's going to be a lot of family restaurants, because Most of the restaurants by number are independent restaurants in British Columbia, but most of the sales are done by the chains. But the chains aren't out of the woods yet either. I mean, they were just bigger and they're going to fall a little bit harder. Definitely, we're seeing some very innovative pivots to, the industry is very entrepreneurial. So we saw governments responding very quickly on policy changes that would take literally decades to do. In a weekend, we were able to convince the government to do delivery of alcohol with food delivery at home. We were able to just announce 2 weeks ago wholesale pricing for restaurants in British Columbia, which is about a 20% purchasing discount, which has been worked on for 20 years in this province. So as David Eby said, you know, when COVID meets red tape and regulation, COVID wins. And it is spurring innovation. We're seeing marketplaces developing right now with restaurants. You know, you can buy toilet paper and their lettuce and all these different things, meal kits. The issues that we have going forward continue to be, we need to see wage subsidization for a while because we can't stand on our own 2 feet yet. The sales aren't there. We're running essentially at 50% capacity, but the acceleration of the patio programs in Surrey has been sort of all right about this. Is really important for restaurants to be able to take their capacity and expand out to patios. So was brought up about trust. Trust, and I'll leave it at this, was a part of the temporary layoff stuff, which hopefully gets dealt with today. But trust, the market is sort of segmented for us like this. 30% of the people have gone back to restaurants going, no problems, we trust it, let's just get on with it. I need to have something in my life beyond staying home and cooking. 30% is a show me, tell me, convince me, I need trust. And 30%, as the Premier said, are in their caves forever until there's a vaccination. So we've got to work on this. And I suspect those numbers are very, probably across the board for a lot of service sectors, about the same. So we're working right now on trust. We're working on maybe some branding that would instill consumer trust. Maybe it's a mark on the doors, you know, saying that business owners gone through COVID training, whatever it is. But when we do that, and I think the last thing I'll say is that we're seeing an absolute trend back to local and our own food security. So I look forward to participating and bringing some perspective for the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Great, Ian. Thank you very much for that insight. And it's great to hear that the industry's innovating. I know certainly within our family, I've got 4 of my 5 kids actually that work in that industry to pay their way through school and such. So thank you for your comments. What I'd like to do now is introduce Carla Guerrera. She's a founder and CEO of Purpose-Driven Development and Planning. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you. And thank you, Haroon. Thank you, Anita and the Surrey Board of Trade team for putting together this really pivotal event today. So I'm the roundtable sector leader for infrastructure and transportation. And we really can't talk about infrastructure without talking about cities. 80% of Canadians live in cities. And as was mentioned earlier today, Surrey is the fastest growing city in British Columbia. And so as we know, our cities are founded on infrastructure, and that's really where this discussion should begin. And despite what many people believe, we know that the evidence is showing that cities are the safest and most successful in responding to crises like this pandemic that we're facing. So if we look at Singapore and Hong Kong as examples of some of the densest cities in the world, those cities have had the most effective response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so why is this, we ask? And we know that this is the case because those cities, when they get city building and density right, it enables the infrastructure and the services and the systems that are necessary in responding to global crises and pandemics like we're facing today. So in our region, locally, we live in an extremely land-constrained region. And we also have an affordability crisis that we've been dealing with for many, many decades. We're facing increasing impacts of climate change as well as aging infrastructure across most of our cities. And with that comes traffic congestion and skyrocketing construction costs. So we also now, in addition to all of that, have this pandemic to recover from. So the opportunity that we have now, I believe, is pivotal and unprecedented in that we have the opportunity to both drive economic recovery while we transform our cities across the province into inclusive, affordable, and climate positive places for generations to come. And this all starts with infrastructure. It starts with investing in infrastructure that is sustainable, that's technologically advanced, as we heard earlier today, that focus on digital transformation, and infrastructure that's resilient as well. So while our senior governments right now are looking at developing programs and stimulating the economy, we need to ensure that infrastructure is recognized as a proven investment method to boost the economy in the short term, as well as provide longer term, wider ranging social, environmental, and economic benefits. Economically, we know the case for resilient, sustainable infrastructure is very strong. And right now, countries around the world are making the largest infrastructure investments since the post-2008 financial crisis. We know that in Canada, for every $1 that's been invested in public infrastructure, it generates $3.83 return on investment. And with that comes significant job creation and job growth, as well as attracting private sector investment, which leads to another opportunity. We have the opportunity to also really strengthen the public and private sector partnerships when it comes to infrastructure. We also have the opportunity to bring in new partners who haven't typically been part of this equation, like First Nations, and help to achieve some of BC's reconciliation and UNDRIP mandates as well, as we're looking at these infrastructure investments. So right now we have this unparalleled and powerful opportunity in BC to both reinvest, rebuild, and reimagine our infrastructure as cities as places where we can thrive for generations to come. So as the infrastructure and transportation roundtable leader, I would love to invite you to our breakout session where we're going to learn from your experiences and your insights on how to pave the best way forward in Surrey to achieve these results. Thanks.
That's great insight, Carla. Thank you very much for leading this session.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And now in the health sector, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ryan Darcy. Ryan, are you, you want to turn, there you are.
Good morning. Well, I'm super excited to be a part of this, and it's just, it's great. So thank you everyone for tuning in. And I think that the major theme that I have in terms of health for Surrey is really optimism. And I'll start first with a bit of a metaphor that I think is appropriate. And that's that I think we all know that the concept that when you break a bone, it actually heals and heals stronger. And I think from with respect to what's happening in healthcare sector, we definitely have the opportunity to greatly strengthen our healthcare sector. Now, part of it's going to be really fun to lead the roundtable in this, but we actually also have the opportunity of a bit of a running start. So for those who may not know, I was one of the people who was involved in co-founding Innovation Boulevard, which originally just a little over 6 or 7 years ago was focused on the concept that we could use technology advances to start addressing some of our major healthcare challenges rapidly and immediately. And at that time, we recognized that our healthcare sector in particular was shifting. The model of how we do health in Canada and worldwide is moving a little bit from a historic reliance on large hospitals with challenges around access to much more of a distributed model where the implementation of things like digital health allowed for you to access your healthcare without necessarily being reliant on everyone necessarily crowding into the same place. So that exercise has been underway over the last, I would say, 8 years. Certainly all of us who are in Surrey recognize the major transformation within Surrey Memorial and the Health and Technology District. And that has focused on the ability to actually start to shift off our reliance to go into hospitals. So the pandemic really, of course, in this way was central to that shift. And what we saw in BC across the province, and thanks in great appreciation for our public health and Dr. Henry and the many, many people who are focused on this, is we were able to really perform well in health during that crisis period. And coming out of that crisis period, we've now been able to understand the specifics of why that shift from a reliance on hospital to much more of a digital infrastructure and much more care where you actually take care of your own data. It's much more patient and person-centric. That shift is critical to our continued health economic rebounds. And what we're seeing for sure is that not only in the crisis, but subsequent the recovery of the healthcare sector, particularly for secondary things like rehabilitation and otherwise, are now benefiting greatly from the ability to provide more digital and portable and deployable capabilities. Now, one of the interesting things about this is that our healthcare system very much is interfaced with our innovation and our business. And it's really a proud moment to listen to Sue's lecture and see MedOptima, because MedOptima is one of many successful Innovation Boulevard companies. And there are a number of companies that work in the health space that have moved well past, overcome that 50% chance of failure, been moved from an SME to a larger company employing jobs, and are globally delivering their products and services around the world. So Surrey has some huge advantages. We also have some challenges, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to get into that. In particular, what we are seeing in health is that there's an increased opportunity and focus around mental health. For our first responders and our healthcare workers, there's challenges around PTSD, and certainly a lot of the fundamental improvements that we will see in caring for our mental health will also drive forward in direct and indirect benefits to BC's economy, to our challenges around homelessness and otherwise. And so I think the health table, I'm very excited to be a part of. I think it's a huge opportunity. And I also feel that we will focus quite quickly to be able to come up with what we were talking about as a list of our top 10 areas to focus on, so that that bone that broke will heal much, much stronger.
Ron, thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate the idea. We've always just concentrated on physical health, and you bring up the aspect of mental health, which I think is been sort of a real emerging trend the last few years and been accelerated by COVID. So I look forward to hearing what comes out of your session tomorrow. So thank you very much for taking the time. And what I'd like to do now is look at the manufacturing sector and have Eamon Piercy, founder and CEO of the Persa Group. And Eamon, you're making me look bad. You've got your tie on, you've got your suit on, you're looking very sharp, my friend. So
thank you. Well, good morning, Haroon and Anita and all the participants with us today. I'm very pleased to be part of this critically important summit right now. And I applaud Anita, Haroon, and the others on the MNP team that have put this together over time, showing the real leadership for our business community. Very pleased to be sharing the focused work with the manufacturing group today, so I can take not only the input from the survey, but also what I'm seeing working with my clients in both the manufacturing and the tech world as well, who are working quickly to recover and position themselves from the pandemic and take advantage of the opportunities that are moving forward quickly. So the manufacturing sector is a significant and valuable and growing part of our economy in Canada, BC, and of course right here in Surrey. It represents 10% of the national GDP and 68% of all the merchandise export in the country. And even in BC, it's the fourth largest manufacturing sector within the province, and BC is the fourth largest manufacturer across the Canada. And it represents approximately 7% of our GDP here in British Columbia. So it's significant. Surrey is home to many, many diverse and growing manufacturing companies. And as Anita mentioned earlier in her presentation, it has 47% of the available industrial land base of all of Metro Vancouver. So it makes it ideally situated to fuel the manufacturing sector in the future. Manufacturing has good, well-paying, largely full-time, export-oriented jobs, which is exactly what we need today. So really, what are the key issues and where are the opportunities? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic, lockdown, and the economic impact, combined with other trends that were already underway, global trends and economic and even geopolitical trends in place, has created significant challenges and significant opportunities for the sector. So I believe the economy in the future will be largely separated into two main areas. One area that I'm calling back to basics, which is durables, and that's largely going to be driven by a slow economic growth in the future. And the second area around technology and innovation. And that's going to enable productivity improvements, mostly for corporate work. So those two areas are going to be significant, and manufacturers that focus on those in the future, I think, are going to do well. We're seeing some changes in supply chain, access to capital in new markets, and we're seeing acceleration of local manufacturing because the pandemic is showing the risks of excessive globalization. And while the pandemic has created short-term challenges, I actually believe there's tremendous long-term challenges. You know, having lived and worked through a number of economic crises in my career, Black Monday, 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, I learned while the short-term pain was significant, it's critical to remember the long-term opportunity. In manufacturing, this means that we have to retool and embrace manufacturing, advanced manufacturing technologies, ideas, methods, processes, and different ways of doing business. We need to rebuild the supply chains and develop new strategies to leverage the best of our two major trends, both the back to basics and innovation, in order to become more competitive in our changing world. So I'm very excited to be part of this, very keen to hear from the participants and to have that information shared tomorrow. And I really think that Surrey and BC are exceptionally well positioned for manufacturers to embrace advanced manufacturing strategies, especially with access to the rapidly expanding technology sector, as noted previously, the large export markets, the infrastructure, and I think one of the most important attributes we have here is our talented workforce. So thanks, Anita. Thanks, Haroon, to be part of this, and I'm really looking forward to the next steps.
Great. Thank you very much, Eamon. And I think that Surrey is made up of a number of smaller manufacturers, and applying technology to it and creating advanced manufacturing creates a real opportunity for manufacturers in BC and Surrey. And for that, this is why, Jill, I wanted to save you as one of the last, because I wanted to bookend you and Sue together, because I think we're talking about technology really sort of being embedded into everything. So please share with us your thoughts and set yourself up for your breakout.
Wonderful. Thank you, Haroon. Thank you, Anita. Thank you to the Board of Trade and MNP today. And it's always a pleasure to be bookended with my partner in inspiration towards a bigger and better Canada, Sue Paish. And I just want to pick up some of the things that Eamon was just talking about, because we're all struggling right now with imagining what the future is going to look like. What can we predict? What can't we at this time? And The Economist came out a few weeks ago with two observations. So two things that we know to be true. Global supply chains are going to be disrupted, and we're all going to be adopting a lot more technology. So we know that those two things are going to be true. We don't know everything about the future, but we know those two things. I'll perhaps just start by talking about, sometimes there's a bit of a misperception that BC's tech sector hasn't been as impacted as badly as others. That it's actually not true, because BC's tech sector is made up of so many small and medium-sized businesses and all small businesses have been super badly impacted by COVID. So we surveyed our members, and the results very consistent with what your survey is showing. So 80% of BC's tech companies seeing a negative impact to revenues, half of those seeing a negative impact of more than 30%. 90% have had to cut costs in order to preserve capital through this challenging time. 60% of companies have had to pivot to provide COVID-related services. And that's maybe one of the good signs that tech companies are super innovative, very entrepreneurial, and do pivot. And that's something that I think will be helpful as we start to think about recovery. The other good news is that 50% of BC's tech companies are still hiring, even during the pandemic. So there are opportunities for good, well-paying jobs that create resilient communities. So the tech sector will come back. It will come back fast and nimble and strong. But it will also enable other sectors to pivot and to adopt innovation. As Sue was talking off the top, Supercluster does such an amazing job of helping larger companies to identify new ways to adopt technology and bring SMEs into the mix to help them with that. At BC Tech, we've been very focused on helping small and medium-sized businesses adopt technology. We pivoted most of our programming in the last 3 months to focus on that exact problem, and we were really pleased to partner with Surrey Board of Trade, amongst others, to bring that program to their members. So when I joined BC Tech as CEO 2.5 years ago, I centered everything that we do around 3 things that I saw were absolutely critical challenges that needed to be overcome. 1, we need to help BC's small tech companies scale up. Scale-up companies are resilient. 2nd, we needed to help BC's SMEs adopt technology. We knew they weren't adopting technology, and SMEs account for 34% of BC's GDP. And we needed to reskill and upskill BC's talent and bring far more diversity into our tech talent pool. Well, I must say, I did not predict that a pandemic might accelerate my efforts for those 3 pillars, but goodness me, we were well positioned. So our 3 core functions are more important than ever. And I'm really looking forward to exploring in the tech breakout group, not just how can we help tech companies, but how can we help the entire economy through our tech sector. Thanks, Haroon.
Great, Jill. Thank you for that insight. And I love how focused you are with the 3 areas that you've got BC Tech focused in on. With that, I will hand it over to Anita to make the concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Haroon. Just a reminder to all of the attendees that the slide deck and the recordings of this morning's session and also tomorrow's session will be sent to you after day 2 and will be on our website at businessinsurrey.com. So now we're going to move you into the industry-specific breakout sessions. Your sector leaders will be providing more details and results specific to the industry, and then we'll guide a discussion on what is going on the ground. We are now going to engage you, Surrey's key stakeholders, in the process of building Surrey's post-COVID-19 economic recovery. We want to hear your feedback on actions. What is needed to ensure that Surrey is positioned to be that opportunity city, to be the largest city within British Columbia? And our sector leaders are going to engage you on why we need to change, what the future opportunities will be for our great city, and how can we collaborate. You were sent an email yesterday. You were sent a link to join your breakout session. You're going to sign into that very shortly. Your sector leaders are also going to give you instructions and a password for Slido, which is the polling technology that we're going to be using. And I also ask all of you to look at your chat function in your breakout sessions as well, because we want continued engagement. Once again, thank you to our premier sponsor, MNP, our gold sponsor, SFU Surrey Campus and the Beedie School of Business, our silver sponsors, Kwantlen Polytechnic University and the Port of Vancouver, and our bronze sponsor, the amazing Downtown Surrey Business Improvement Association. We have another great morning lined up for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. with a Premier of British Columbia, John Horgan, and also the Minister of Economic Development, Competitiveness and Innovation, Michelle Mungal. We'll see you tomorrow. Enjoy your breakout sessions. And thank you so much for participating in the Surrey Economic Recovery Summit. Thank you.